in this moment of expanding school closures. We see the room filling. We just had a call with the NEA Foundation in the last hour. Between these two calls, we've had almost 200 people sign up to participate in figuring out how do we in the philanthropic community get dollars to students in need as they are in need of things from food that they rely on their schools for, to the tools to do distance learning, which so many of them are going to be expected to do. So we're in a really unique moment. I want to just say a couple of things before I turn things over to our colleagues at the AFT Foundation. Number one, I want to say a little bit about the role of GFE. So at GFE, we are the nation's largest network of funders in the education space. We have almost 300 members. It's incredible to me that we have probably more than half of our members participating in these calls and trying to figure out how to respond quickly in this really important moment. We see ourselves as an organization, as a connector across philanthropy and to those who can help, and also an information source. And so we set out in response to this crisis moment to find partners who, number one, have contact in a variety of different locations. Cities where there is need, rural areas where there is need, really kind of the ability to figure out where need is greatest. And then number two, to receive and deploy resources broadly and quickly to meet that need. And so we are launching a series of calls, these first two today with the NEA Foundation and the AFT Foundation, because they meet that criteria. They have local affiliates who really kind of understand what's going on the ground and where need is the greatest. And they have the ability as a foundation to receive and deploy resources. A couple of notes. Number one, the AFT Educational Foundation is a separate entity from the AFT. So it's not the union itself. It is a grant-making organization. And I believe that on both of these calls, we've had the NEA and AFT, even though we've foregrounded one, the other has been a participant because there's great potential for them to work in concert. A couple of things about expectations for this call. Number one, this is a formative conversation. This is an initial conversation. We are hoping to build some work coming out of it together, but we know that this is a very quickly moving situation. We don't have all of the answers for you on this call. We hope that this is a space for people to participate, to build ideas together for how we can serve students. I know from the last call that there's also a huge interest in how we, in the philanthropic community, can support nonprofits through this time. We're starting with students because we know that there's a risk that some students are going to be hungry and in other areas, ways of deep need. So we will try to address both, but this is a call really focused on students and their needs. So we want to hear from people, and we just want to acknowledge that that this is, we're building the plane while flying, and invite you to do that with us. Okay, so a little bit on the agenda. Very quickly, I will turn things over, and then we'll hear from a number of different folks at the AFT Foundation, led by Sheetal Shah. So we're excited to hear from them, hear from a little bit of what they're hearing on the ground, what they're thinking in terms of how they can help with this response. We will then turn things over to you all for questions, to have a collaborative conversation. It might take a variety of different directions. What we can do from there is, in the last few minutes of the call, just think about next steps and make a plan for how to bring this work forward. And when I'm talking about this work, I'm talking about a potential body of support with the AFT Foundation. And I'm also talking about kind of other outgrowths that might happen on this call. A few notes in terms of technology. Number one, we are recording this and we'll be able to kind of share it with others. We know that there were tons of people who signed up, but we know there were more who couldn't meet this window. It's incredible that we got the level of participation that we've gotten, given that we put the notice out less than 24 hours ago. We encourage you to use the chat box to ask questions and comments. I want to be incredibly clear that this is a call for funders, and this is not a place to, it's a great place for funders to share resources and ask questions. This is not a place for pitching, other ways of, other things that need dollars at this moment. And I'll finally say, because we're well over 50 participants, and if last hour is any indication, that number is going to grow over this time. If you are not from the NEA Foundation, probably want to turn off your video. Sometimes if we have a tremendous amount of streaming video, it's going to make the call bumpy. I don't know how else to say that, but we're worried about any kind of glitches in the call. So that's all I have to say. And so again, encourage questions in the chat, encourage conversation, but I'm going to turn it over to begin to Sheetal.
Okay, good. So I think what Celine meant is if you're with the AFT Foundation, keep your videos on. If you're not, take them off. Yes, okay. So I'm going to be short and sweet because I want you to hear from my two colleagues who are leading these efforts within the AFT. I represent the AFT Education Foundation, through which we push resources back out into the field. So Celine, thank you so much for pulling this together. I know things have been moving at lightning speed. Every single minute, I feel like there's another school closure that we all need to sort of coalesce around and figure out based on what they need, tailored to them, how we get it to them, and what we get to them. So I'm thankful to everyone. I think there's like 60 or 70 people on phone or video, just for being thought partners and how best to be efficient and most effectively get them what they need. So I'm going to kick it off to my colleague, Director of Healthcare here, Kelly Troutner, because I know she has a hard stop right before 1. And Kelly is going to give you the overall implications around COVID-19 for our schools and students, which will then lead us into how and why we're hearing about what needs on the ground we need to fill. So Kelly, without further ado, if you want to take over the mic, I'm going to go on mute.
Great, thank you, Sheetal, and thank you, Celine, for having me. I think what I'm going to do, we've been moving 1,000,000 miles an hour and have been over the last probably 48 hours completely inundated with requests for assistance and support, not only in the education space, but also in the other parts of our organization. So I think what I'll do is just go over kind of quickly, point by point, the way Randy is talking about this right now. And then I'll share a couple of specific examples that might help provide just a little more depth in terms of what our affiliates are actually advocating on right now, at least as it relates to K-12 schools. So the way Randy is talking about this is how we do prevention, precaution, planning, and then managing impact of the virus. And we've been talking about COVID-19 since before it was named COVID-19, probably about 2 months. Randy has been working on this every single day. So the way that we've been looking at this has evolved, but there's one thing that has been pretty consistent throughout, and that is the lack of capacity in our communities for testing for COVID-19, previously called coronavirus, because as I'm sure that if you've been following the news, you know that this coronavirus is one of several coronaviruses. It's actually a common form of contagion that infects humans. This one just happens to be a brand new one, which is why there's such a sense of urgency, and the containment strategies feel so extreme to us. So the first thing that we are doing right now in terms of our plan is focusing on the health and safety of our frontline providers across every division, and I won't talk so much about the other divisions, but in terms of our schools, cleaning supplies are really important. We know from talking with a lot of our schools over the past several weeks that there are schools that don't have enough. For example, I had a conversation with Patty Murray's office a couple of days ago where her staffer shared with us that in Washington State, they have about 2 weeks of cleaning supplies left in the schools. So when they do go back in, there's going to be, that's going to be pretty strenuous for them. Also related to schools, the communication between the districts and the state and local public health officials is critical. In most communities, even in ones where we would expect that that coordination would be in place, it is not, and they definitely are scrambling in those communities. And I think in places like Washington State, they're making it work quickly, and they actually are better equipped than in a lot of places. Also, safety mechanisms for other school support staff, cafeteria workers, also, looking at training for those people so they understand, the contours of how to address a potential infection in their schools. For example, we have a lot of examples right now, but in one of our schools, there was a positive test. It was the head custodian in the school. So he was sent to the hospital. It was in intensive care. He's out of intensive care now, but he was in the intensive care unit. Because there was a lack of education amongst the rest of the employees in that school, 2 other employees went to visit this head custodian in the hospital and then came back to school and taught for 3 to 4 days before anyone knew that they had done this visit. So the entire school potentially was exposed at that point. In Chicago public schools, which is where there was an aide in Vaughn, I can't remember the name of the high school, technical high school occupation. I can't remember the name of the high school. My background is healthcare, as Sheethal said, so I'm learning this very quickly. At any rate, the aide who was infected with the virus was one of the people who had been on one of the cruise ships, and when this aide went home, they had no symptoms, so went to work, and actually was, through the course of their work, they worked with medically fragile children. So all of the students that this aide was working with were exposed. In addition, there had been a somewhat large PD event in that building during that week. So potentially teachers and others from across the district exposed. The thing with Chicago, there are a lot of things with Chicago, but one of the most basic needs in Chicago that the local there is actually, I think they've got pretty good communication with the district at this point, but hearing that having hand soap in the bathrooms was a challenge. Just some of the most basic hygiene needs for containing the spread of virus are things that we're talking about. Let's see, I'm sorry that I feel so scattered right now. So also focusing on the health and safety of our families and our communities. So Randy's been talking a lot about the need for what feels like really drastic social distancing protocol. So the containment strategies, for example, like in New Rochelle and in New York, and exactly why those things are necessary in some cases. One thing that Randy has been talking about quite a bit is Governor Cuomo's initial response on school closures has been once there is a case of COVID-19 confirmed in a building, the very first thing to do is to close the school for 24 hours and then do an assessment. So what does that mean? That means employing a public health sort of strategy where they do what's called contact tracing. And that means essentially, just as the public health officials do out in the community, doing inside a building, seeing exactly what parts of the building the potentially infected person has been, where they've been, down to what they've probably touched and what people they've interacted with, and then employing a communication strategy to make sure anyone who's come in contact with the virus is aware that they've come in contact with the virus and is given instructions on what to do. So those sorts of things have been at top of mind for all of our affiliate leaders, and making sure that educators are involved in the decisions that are made in terms of producing the preparedness plan, whether it's for closures, whether it's for remote learning. And I'll defer to my colleagues in the education issues department at the AFT to talk about what those things are. They've done some just really phenomenal work and very holistic thinking on this. But I think one thing is really clear from Randy's point of view. If the decision is made to close a school, as in the decisions that have been very prominent in the news over the last 24 hours for weeks, a lot of them are built on spring breaks. From Randy's point of view, there is no bad decision in how these closures and decisions are being made. The bad decisions are the ones where we know there's potentially a positive case and they don't do anything. So Randy's trying to be very supportive of local and state government officials. Like I said before, the lack of testing capacity has really hindered, at a community level, the ability to do what's called disease surveillance in the community to really pinpoint, where the disease or the virus has originated, and to really do a robust assessment on where it probably is. And the final thing that at the AFT that we're focused on is really looking at the long-term economic impacts of the spread of the virus. And some of the things that we're talking about are for our educators as it relates to schools, educators and school support folks. What does it mean if school was closed for those? So there are a couple of different categories: the people who are potentially involved in remote learning, and those who are displaced during the closure and not working. So people who work on an hourly basis. And what does that mean for the students? What does it mean in terms of where they, for students who really rely on the school for their nutritional needs and for in some cases their health care? How are communities filling the gap? In a lot of places, our locals and other organizations are stepping up, but there's a real need there, a critical need there. I just got a text a little bit ago from our leader in New Mexico, Stephanie Lee, and she's been on the phone with the governor of New Mexico. They have 6 confirmed cases in New Mexico. I think she said 90% of the students in New Mexico schools qualify for free and reduced lunch. Mm-hmm. So they're implementing measures to make sure that students can have access to breakfast and lunch every day. They're having to work through the USDA waiver process for that. But they don't want to, stand at the doors to see who qualifies and who doesn't. So they're only going to get waivers for part of that. There definitely will be some funding needs there. And then of course the technology needs for students who are in a distance learning kind of situation. You're on mute, Sheetal.
All right,
I'll say
I'm not on mute.
For help from
Okay.
helpful from a healthcare perspective.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly. That was super helpful, and it's real-time information that you're sharing. I don't know, Celine, if you want folks to just type in their questions for if there's anything in particular for Kelly while we move on to the next, for Kelly Trotner, while we move on to the next piece of it. And before, I think what would be helpful in light of what Kelly Trotner just shared is to move on to what we're doing in terms of resources for the remote learning, and then I'll sort of close up with some of the priority needs building off of what Kelly shared. And so Kelly—
I think that's great. And, yeah, and I think in terms of questions for Kelly, those can go in the chat box right now. I think, one of the things that stood out to me, number one was the hygiene needs. Number two was that there are dollars available for lunches, but there are going to need to be supplemental dollars because there aren't going to be people standing at the gate saying we're only giving to this many students, because those are the ones who have been traditionally eligible for free and reduced lunch. So helpful. I see notes in the chat box around how different districts are handling that. And I think the short story there is we've got a variety of approaches happening at varying levels of sophistication and varying levels of cover across the country right now. I think we do want to create the space to continue to share what's happening in different places. The chat box is good for that. And I will try really hard to be monitoring for questions and interject those.
Thank you, Celine. So let's move on to Kelly Booz, Director of our AFT Share My Lesson and e-learning platforms. Kelly?
Yeah, great. Hi, everybody. Like Sheila said, I'm the Director of our AFT e-learning and our Share My Lesson website. And I want to take a chance to show you and talk to you about a lot of the resources and stuff that we've been putting out and really been out in front of this as of even January, putting resources out as schools were looking for ideas and of what to do in preparation, prevention, preparation, and now moving to remote learning. Celine, would it be okay if I share my screen? You can just nod your head yes or no.
Yes, I believe, yes. I think that, so I'm not the person in charge, but I think you can.
Yeah. I got it? Okay. Terrific. All right. So I'm a visual person, so as long as I'm going to talk about a website and we're all online, I want to showcase the different stuff that we have on our site. So our AFT Share My Lesson website, let me just start with some just like basic background. This is a free resource site for educators and parents. We have over 1.6 million educators nationwide who've joined on to Share My Lesson. That's beyond just the AFT membership. So Share My Lesson is open to anybody, whether you are an AFT, NEA, non-union member, private, public, charter, you name it. Anybody and everybody on this call right now can also become a member very fast. So the site was intentionally created as a place to share lessons and resources and publications for educators, and we have over 400,000 resources pre-K through 12th grade in every subject area. But one of our strengths over the years since 2012, when we first launched, was being able to be responsive when anything current is happening, and in particular, especially with the coronavirus, with it's down here. Okay, with the coronavirus outbreak, there you go. By the end of January, we had launched a collection of resources that we've been continuing to build from, specifically on the coronavirus, with resources on, just prevention and ideas and checklists and printables for communities to get in front of, to share with their communities. All of this is free and downloadable. So we've been sharing this out and has been getting a ton of traffic on the site. Just this week alone, we've also launched a new community, which is, I clicked the wrong link, sorry. We launched a new community that's specifically focused on remote learning and trying to share ideas and best practices as school systems get prepared for school closure or extended school closure. My kids' school system, we just learned, is going to be closed until April 13th, starting Monday. So a lot of schools are not prepared for the online learning and the implications of having long-term at-home learning. So one of what we've been using is our online community to continue to share resources and build our resource bank for folks. And within this community, members can add lessons. They can use the discussion forum. They can use a chat forum. So one of the things that we're trying to do is just continue to get the message out. Because we've been out in front of this since really early on. We get a lot of traffic for this, but one of the things that we would love is for anybody to help continue to push this out. Again, it's a free resource for everybody to access. The other thing that we have capability, and we've been doing this will be our 8th year, March 24, 25, 26 is our annual Share My Lesson virtual conference. That is a 3-night completely virtual event. So it is a conference that we most definitely do not have to cancel. Because as we like to say it, it's professional development and online professional development that you can do in your PJs. We have over 42 webinars that we do over the course of 3 days from a variety of different folks covering many different topics. So for example, this is our virtual conference space. Like we said, we've been in the virtual online learning webinar space for many years. We've done well over 500 plus webinars over the course of the last few years. And this is definitely a very good model as people look for ideas of how to continue to do some learning. So these webinars are really more geared for educators, but this is definitely a model to think about for educators supporting students. So, and then just yesterday we opened up and launched 2 new webinars that we're going to be doing on the coronavirus in partnership with PBS NewsHour and Facing History and Ourselves. One is going to be really focused on, what schools should be doing to prepare and prevent, as well as some strategies for how do you do online learning and remote learning. And then the second one with Facing History and PBS NewsHour will be focused more on the current topic and all the different themes that we need to talk about in terms of trauma-informed practices and racism and xenophobia and some of the other just kind of current event type, using coronavirus as more of a teaching tool. Sheetha, I'll pass back to you. Sheetha, you might be on mute.
I keep being on mute. I'm sorry. All I was saying is thank you for sharing that. I think, it is food for thought as, the folks on the phone are working with communities and grantees who are going to need to potentially use more online education and move some conferences online. So I'm putting a plug out there for after March 20, the next few weeks for you guys to reach out to us if you need help thinking through, how to do virtual conference stuff. So before we move, I know we're at the top of the hour and have about 20 minutes left. I wanted to just share some of, in addition to what Kelly number 1 shared in terms of the hand soap, we're also, which is no surprise to many of you, we're hearing a need for hotspots, right? So as more students and families are either being, keeping the social distance or, schools are closing, how do we, and we're thinking through this, how do we provide access when, public libraries are going to be closing? And that is often a place where folks who don't have internet or computers at home are going to access information. So that is a top priority. And, most especially as we're hearing and getting real-time information is from our ELL populations, obviously from our low-income families and students, and also our Native American communities, right, who, in addition to the ELL populations in rural places, are having limited access. So how do we as a community support their connection to continual learning, but also just being a part of everything else that is happening, right? So hotspots, we're also hearing the ability to offer unlimited data. So phones, everyone has a phone, but often people are on, limited plans. So if we're asking them potentially to use their phone as hotspots or as a learning tool, how can we as a community support them and resource them in that? And if they have hotspots, well, if they don't have a laptop, how are they going to use a hotspot? So really thinking that technology piece through, and that is something that we're definitely hearing. Cleaning supplies, as Kelly said, hand soap for bathrooms, hand sanitizer, and then I've been seeing in the chat box the, breakfast and lunch needs of students. So I put in there that one school district, Kelly had shared earlier this week, is using their school buses to transport the breakfasts and lunches to the students in their school district community. But how can we, you know, whether it's backpacks filled with non-perishables that we're, you know, having community members or our local affiliates distribute. So just really thinking creatively, where some districts might not be able to use their school buses, right? Some people may feel unsafe going and picking something up. So the breakfast and lunch thing, while there is, you know, state like New Mexico is doing, but accessing the funding, like Celine said, might be an issue. So how can we be quick in helping with that? So so in addition to the ELL, rural and Native American student populations, one thing that AFT is really trying to think through and grappling with is how do we support the needs, or how do we reach the students with disabilities and their families in this space, right? And we don't have an answer, but I kind of wanted to throw that out to everyone who's on the phone and the video conference. And feel free to throw stuff in the chat box around that. I know we're here to answer questions, but that's something that we are grappling with. Celine?
And I'll just interject real quickly that, as I mentioned at the beginning, these are calls that are semi-structured. So I really appreciate AFT jumping in and reporting on what they're hearing on the ground and creating some entry points for additional conversation. You know, we have the ability through our platform, GFE Connects, through regular phone call, Zoom, to have some subset conversations coming out of this call. So what we'll do after this call, and I'll say this again later, is just reach out to everyone who participated and kind of create some entry points. So if there is a particular interest in figuring out the challenges with special needs populations, English language learner populations, just the kind of discrete challenge of hotspots. Those are all things that we can pick up with the folks who are specifically interested in those conversations. So go ahead.
Perfect. Thank you, Celine. And I'll wrap up by just sort of sharing our Education Foundation sort of structure and how we do distribute resources back out into the field. So we work primarily through our membership, so our state federations, as well as our local affiliates. And as more and more states are closing down schools as a whole, that would be one of our sort of go-to initial entry points to figure out and assess, okay, what other districts, they would have the best pulse on what's needed within the districts around within their state. So we have our state affiliate as well as our local affiliate structure that we would, you know, if with resources, we would push them back out through them. Celine, does that help? Is that good?
Yes, I think that's helpful. So now I would like to encourage people, number one, to pose questions. Number two, to just make comments. On the last call, we had, for example, a funder from Seattle who, you know, is arguably kind of ahead of some of the rest of the country in kind of processing what this all means for schools and for kids and for at-risk populations. And so, you know, so if people have comments, this is a great place kind of for shared learning. If people have questions, so I invite you to unmute yourself, ask questions, make comments specifically related to what you heard from NEA or maybe more broadly. And I also encourage people to use the chat box. If I see questions in the chat box, I will try to pose those to our AFT Foundation colleagues. So I'll pose this question. So I'll do the short one first. How are some of the ways that AFT and others are supporting families with access to broadband and devices?
Sorry, I'm unmuting myself. Hi, Farhad. I think that's questions from you. I'm going to actually quickly pass it over to Kelly Booth, but that's what we're looking for. The way we would want to support families with access to devices is work through our state and local affiliates to give them the resources, the monetary resources, whether it's to buy in bulk or whether we would buy in bulk and then push out via them would be sort of what I'm thinking. Kelly, do you have any other in terms of broadband?
And Kelly, you might address the question of how resources are getting to parents, or
Right.
whether you have some capacity to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in terms of the at least the technology access, I did also see that Comcast is opening up and allowing kind of free 60-day access for Wi-Fi and technology and stuff like that. So to the extent other companies can start doing that, I think that would be really helpful. And then also reduce prices, like $9.95 for a month for access, depending on your need. In terms of resources for parents, that is built into, and we're going to continue to expand this. So if there are organizations that you work with that are, I'm going to share my screen again. If there are organizations that you work with that are building out content and they have great content, we would love to continue to add it to our coronavirus community. We already have a very active group of people who are coming directly to the site. Our website is, we're doing all we can to make sure that it doesn't crash at this point because we're getting a lot of traffic. But on this page, we also have created some learning at home collections by grade area. So for example, if I go into our grades 3 to 5 resources, and again, this is for parents and for teachers, there are resources specifically with handouts and ideas for parents, resources by subject area, resources obviously on the coronavirus, but different ideas of stuff that you can do both at home or for teachers that might be trying to reach their students. And it also has a number of social emotional learning resources as well for kids. Some kids are scared. I mean, my 7-year-old and 4-year-old are well aware of the word coronavirus, and they have definitely a visual reaction when the word comes up. I mean, we're trying to take it very seriously and make sure that they're being serious about washing their hands. But, this is also we have to take into account the emotional needs of our kids. I mean, we're certainly taking into account emotional needs of ourselves, but, you don't want to underestimate their needs. So we're going to continue to build these resources out and add more materials. So to the extent there's other organizations, again, who are adding and building content, we'd love to continue to add it to this community because this has really become a good central hub for sharing resources for parents and for teachers.
Kelly, while you're on, can you pull up the Coloring Colorado resources? And while you can, through your screen share. So Coloring Colorado, for those of you online, is one of AFT's sort of leading partners. We've founded them about 15, 20 years ago, and we have over, these are all resources for parents and educators to work with parents, and it's over 25 different languages. It started in Spanish, of course, but they've also pulled together resources for parents, which we are disseminating.
Can I ask a question while we still have Kelly right there as well? So we have a number of funders who have a number of pathways to influence. And so it's incredibly helpful to see these resources that exist for teachers. Obviously, they can be accessed by parents. Are there financial challenges to getting them out? And can you identify those and some of your thoughts there?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. Our site is definitely free. It's part of our AFT mission, as part of our operating budget to have this content and resources. But there are real challenges with marketing and trying to get the messages out. So to the extent that we can amplify our voice even more so and try to get these resources out, I mean, that would be really helpful.
That's very helpful. I want to invite others, questions, comments. There is a lot going into the chat. And again, we'll pull all of this back for you. If there are questions that remain for AFT to answer, we'd be happy to have them answer them. I also noticed in the chat box kind of an acknowledgement, number one, that one important area to press is in the communications companies. They have partnerships with organizations like Netflix to get free Netflix access. And, those of us who are in positions, to ask and to push thinking about how can that access be translated to educational materials, I think is important.
Yeah, and actually, like that is actually a good point too. I mean, this is in terms of Netflix, we did this is something that would require some support and funding. We did a partnership with Amazon Studios on the release of the Aeronauts movie this last fall, and involved a number of our AFT Science Cadre teacher members to develop resources and lesson plans, and specifically around the film itself. So to the extent that there are other films and stuff that we can get to kids for free, and then develop resources and lessons that teachers and parents could use at home for the film, I think that could be a really good use. But that does require support, because it's the amount of time that it took for our AFT members to develop really great content.
Yeah, and so what I'm hearing in terms of resource needs, still the two that rise to the top and are in your capacity to kind of help with are the hygiene items and hotspots and kind of access to being able to get online. Okay, I have another question that might be for you all at AFT Foundation, might be more broad. How can students access mental health services if schools are closed? I think that's a great question. Does anyone have solutions or practices that might be beneficial, given that this is a highly stressful time for kiddos? Exactly right. This is great. Again, I want to point to possibility for additional future conversation. AFT folks or others who are on the line would love to hear folks' thoughts on that.
You know, right now with, it's a great question. Am I on mute? No, I'm not. I'm on double mute often. So, no, we are still trying to figure that out in terms of with schools closing and, you know, those professionals not in the schools that actually have those healthcare professionals, how they're offering access. But I will commit to, as we find examples, Celine, of how this is happening, and if others could do the same, we'll share them with you so you can share it more broadly, because it's, as Kelly just mentioned, the social emotional health of the young people is going to definitely begin to be a bigger need around this.
Yeah, and, you know, I do know that...
Yeah, and I
Go ahead, Kelly.
Oh, okay. No, I was just going to say, no, I appreciate the question on the mental health. I mean, we have been putting out as many publications and resources and ideas and checklists, you know, since January on this particular topic. And that is one that we really should consider developing as well. The most recent one we put out is a checklist of questions teachers should be asking their school districts and school administrations in terms of what you need to do to be prepared for remote learning. But I think that is a really good resource that we should develop too.
I think that's right. And, you know, there are online counseling and support services like Talkspace that, you know, maybe a group of funders want to work with to address this issue. So I see a couple of questions in the chat box. So Marla Uselli mentioned that one state is about to announce that virtual behavioral health services for students while schools are closed. So that's Marla at AFT. So that would be a resource. Again, we will put it up on our site and try to get it out to all of you who are on the call. A next question, as states and cities build out collective funds like in Seattle, folks would love to see examples of that. I know that was a topic that came up in the last conversation as well. So as we, GFE, a national organization, first think about our national partners. Think about those that have touch points in all parts of the country, including rural areas that might be overlooked by community foundations in kind of the larger and more resourced communities. We do want to acknowledge and create space for that some of this should be local, and that we will do our best to continue to get examples and tee up those types of conversations too. Yes, and so this notion, and then we see again in the chat box the notion of being able to do kind of text-based mental health services, which I think are what kids are looking for in a lot of cases these days. Oh, and there's a HIPAA complaint. a HIPAA compliant Zoom resource. One of our research grantees is using for another. So that's interesting. Yeah, that's helpful. Other comments and questions? We have a handful more minutes. I would love to invite anyone who has ideas for how to operationalize some of this work with the AFT Foundation, other things that are on their minds that they would like to tee up as we move forward and try to support our members in any ways we can.
And you know, Celine, another, I'm not unmuted, another sort of just operational type thing is for those folks who are either regional or community foundations, if you don't already have a connection to our state or local affiliate and you want to be connected and have this conversation, like I would be happy to do that and make that connection. If you want to start local and then go as opposed to through national.
And I see in the chat box, there was a reference to EdEquity and their work. So they, with Believe in Students, have put together a student relief fund that's really focused on the post-secondary level and making sure the basic needs for housing and addressing hunger, that as we kind of close down every college campus, so quickly, there's a real need there. So that's up on our website of resources. Now it's in the chat box, and that's an effort that's really directed at the post-secondary level. So want to draw your attention to that as well, because that's live and working right now. Other comments or questions at this point before we move on to next steps? Okay. So what I'd like to propose, and this is subject to feedback from anyone on the line. So we have, all of those of you who have registered, we'd love to engage in a further conversation. We'll reach back out to you later today. We'll, number one, ask about your appetite for participating in future conversations with the AFT Educational Foundation, working through some of these issues of how do we get these basic needs of schools met with a partner who has access to school districts and educators all around the country. Number two is just ask you what other kind of topics that came up for you are topics that you'd like to have a continued conversation on. And then number three, I just want to offer that we have a resource in GFE Connects, which is an online platform where we can host kind of ongoing conversation about these issues so that you can kind of dive in and out of them when you feel ready and have the time. So I think this is a really important moment. I really do think this is a moment where funders, where we can do the most good if funders can come together. And so I really appreciate people's attention to this call, participation on this call. I want to give one more moment for any feedback, thoughts from the AFT Education Foundation friends or others.
No, Celine, just thank you very much on behalf of AFT and the Education Foundation. We are ready and willing to partner to just make sure that the resources that we've identified today, but also that we know are going to keep coming, are met for our students, families, and educators. So thank you again for this opportunity.
Great. So thank you to all of you on the call. We will follow up, and we hope that this is a mechanism to get funds to students who need them as quickly as possible. Thank you so much, and enjoy the end of Friday the 13th.